Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. Your host, a behavioral scientist and bachelor, talks to leading experts and successful singles about living solo and living well. Travel more, make things, sleep in when you want to. Here's the playbook for the person who is unapologetically unattached. Now, please welcome Dr. Peter McGraw.
Welcome back. This episode continues my exploration of marriage and its alternatives. I speak to an author of a book that examines alternative forms of marriage. I'll tease you with a few of them. There's the starter marriage, the safety marriage, and my favorite, the living apart together marriage. No bonus material again this week, but I could use that extra time, if you would give it, to rate and review the podcast if you haven't done so. I managed to get a forthcoming guest because she read the reviews and commented on how lovely they are. So thank you for the help. I hope you enjoy the episode. Let's get started. Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. I'm Peter McGraw. Today's guest is Vicki Larson. Vicki's an award-winning journalist, the lifestyle editor, columnist, and writer at the Marin Independent Journal. She's the co-author of The New I Do, Reshaping Marriage for Skeptics, Realists, and Rebels. Her writings can be found pretty much everywhere. The New York Times, The Guardian, The Washington Post, Quartz, HuffPost, and Medium, to name a few. Welcome, Vicki.
Hi, Peter. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a great pleasure. So, Vicki, how does one turn from being an award-winning journalist, lifestyle editor, columnist, and writer at the Marin Independent Journal and end up writing a book about reshaping marriage in a modern age?
Well, you have to be divorced twice, probably. That really helped.
It's kind of like the guy who never married being the host of Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's really an interesting story because I met Susan, my co-author, because she's a therapist here in Marin, and for a story, and I interviewed her, and then a few years later, Huffington Post started having a divorce section, and
is that right?
And so she was writing for it, and I was writing for it. So we said, we should do something together, And then after.
This is after your second divorce?
Yeah, I had to get married and have. I thank my former husband for marrying me so I could divorce him, so I could write a book. I never would have written a book about marriage if he hadn't married and divorced me. So it's really great. So yeah, Susan told me that she'd been working on a book, and the thing, Susan became known as a divorce coach because when she started, a lot of people were coming to her. They were getting divorced, and there weren't a lot of support. There wasn't a lot of support for people.
Yes.
So she that became her specialty. And the funny thing is, she wrote a book about divorce just as she was getting married for the first time at age 40. And, and so she asked me to come on board. And we both came to it from really different angles. Susan not getting married until she was old. People were like, well, what's wrong with you? I haven't been married and divorced twice. People would say, well, what's wrong with you?
Yeah, I have to say, I just had a conversation recently about this very idea, sort of being middle-aged and dating. And so there's kind of, sort of two places you can be in, and each of them has their cons, right? So the first one is, he's never married. Not sure he can settle down. Is he ready to, quote unquote, grow up? And then the other one is, well, he's been married, but he didn't do it very well. And so why should you expect that he's gonna get it all worked out this second time?
Exactly.
So to speak.
Yeah. Well, we were both experiencing the shame, which tends to cloud the whole marriage versus single issue. There's a lot of shaming because if you're married and you don't make it until, like, someone has to die for you to have a successful marriage, right? Any other exit from marriage, you're doing it wrong. And then if you remain single, you're a suspect. You know, you're a spinster if you're a woman. If you're a guy,
a Peter Pan if you're a guy. Yes.
You know, and that's why you see, you know, the new magazines like George Clooney finally getting a little piece of me died when George Clooney got married. He actually had been married before. People kind of forget about that. He was not a lifelong bachelor. Yeah.
Oh, is that true? I didn't know that.
Marriage, but yeah.
I see. His starter marriage.
Yes.
Yes. Well, that's a preview for the listeners. You'll see in a few moments here. So one thing that I think is very interesting, I did not know that HuffPost had a divorce column or section. Do they still, or has it been shuttered?
I think they still do. I mean, I was writing for HuffPost for quite a while, mostly in divorce, and then they changed their platform, and not anyone could write for them, and so I kind of, you know, moved away and went to Medium, which seems to be the new HuffPo.
It is, yes. Medium is I actually purposely added that to the list so you would be more hip.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's the new hot location.
I'm hot and it's hot. Yes.
You know, it's interesting that you bring that up, because I was looking to pitch some solo focused articles. So take some of the podcast content that I have already and then repurpose it for a newspaper, magazine, op-ed, just to do what you do, so to speak. Now, I was unsuccessful, unfortunately, but what I did was I was sort of looking around for where might a good location be, right? You know, who's the right editor to target and so on. You know, I'm not a professional journalist, so I don't have a Rolodex of editors who, you know, in relationships and so on. So I'm looking at mastheads and cold emailing people and things like that. But I came across The Atlantic has a family section. And I started fussing around with this. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I copied the announcement of the family section. And I started rewriting it as if they were going to launch a single section.
Okay.
You know, and I mean, it's really fascinating, like changing. I wonder if I could find it as we talk. Oh, I do have it right here. I'm going to pull this up real quick, just if I can. So this is me trying to rewrite this, right? So it says, so the title of it is Family, you know, so I changed it to Single. Right. And it says, introducing the Atlantic's Single section, a new hub for the coverage of American life from the viewpoint of its most basic unit. When the Atlantic founders created this magazine 161 years ago, the single person was not top of mind. The Atlantic would be devoted to art, literature, blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. Soon enough, though, the editors came to understand that the well-being of a nation, its culture, and its economy was tied up with the health and vitality of its single people. And so the question single face, and I haven't put all those questions in.
I think that's awesome. You know, the Washington Post had a single section. Lisa Bonos ran Solo-ish.
Yes, that's right. But it's now a relationship section or something.
They're always trying to throw that narrative, that narrative that everyone wants to be in a relationship, and that is the normal thing to do. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so let's so you to step back, you know, you have some expertise from personal experience. You have some expertise from your writing. You have some expertise from your co-author, obviously. But talk through a little bit more about the genesis of this book. This, you know, why do I have you on here? I want to talk about this book. I think it's a fascinating concept.
You. Well, we didn't go out to create new versions of marriage, but we noticed that they were already happening. And, when people talk about marriage, they talk about traditional marriage as if there is one kind of marriage, but there isn't. Marriage has changed so much throughout history. Marriage looks different throughout the world. And so we really wanted to bust that stereotype. And also because the divorce rate is pretty high. Now, the narrative is always that it's 50%. Well, it's not. Yeah. It's more about 30 to 40%, depending on the age range. But for people my age, 50 and older, it is 50%.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm glad you brought that up because I don't do series yet with Solo, but sometimes I kind of hit on a theme. And it starts to, so early on, I had like a little bit of a health and wellness, you kind of line up a few people because I'm sort of thinking about that stuff. This will be in some, within maybe 4 or 5 weeks, this will be a third kind of very relationship marriage focused topic. And so one of them is, I have a conversation with Mary Dom where we talk about people who should not have married in history. And so the way we think about it is if they were alive today, they probably wouldn't have married.
Yeah.
Like they didn't have a choice back then because you kind of had to.
Exactly. I actually believe my father, if he were a young man today, he would not have gotten married and had children. It's not to say that he didn't love my mother or that he didn't love my sister and me. It's just that, he went from being a dutiful son to being a dutiful husband, to being a dutiful father. And it's not really, like, he probably would have loved to have been an airplane pilot or something. He would have, he was an engineer and he had a wonderful career. But I think, when I try to get a sense of my dad, I don't think he would have married, Yeah.
Yeah, I think about this movie, It's a Wonderful Life, with Jimmy Stewart. It's a lovely film. I mean, there's a lot to like about Jimmy Stewart. He's kind of a, you would see how he would be hard to be a leading man today, but yet he pulled it off with such grace.
I would marry him.
But, people forget, people sort of ignore the beginning of that movie where he doesn't want to be married. He wants to go to South America. He wants to just take his piece of luggage and his map and see the world, and because he was the dutiful son, he takes over the building and loan, the Bailey building and loan, and then his brother goes off to war and has, and then goes off to college and does all these kinds of things. And and George Bailey becomes, the loving husband, father, and so on. And so, yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I had a striking conversation with my own dad when we were both adults. So my parents divorced, and I got kind of reunited with him in my teens when I went off to college. And I remember sitting with him at a restaurant once, and I just asked him, I was like, why did you marry Mom? Because it wasn't clear to me, knowing both of them, that they were a good pair, like that it was like love at first sight or something like that kind of thing. And he, it was Vietnam. He was going off. He had been enlisted. He basically he has this fantastic story about being pulled in front of a federal judge for dodging the draft. He wasn't dodging the draft, at least not. He was just a screw up. So he hadn't changed his address basically, and they had sent his his draft whatever notice to a previous address, and he didn't get it. And one day some MPs show up at his door. You know what I mean? Kind of thing. So, and I was like, so why did you do this? And, he just said to me in this very matter-of-fact way, this is the late 60s when this was all going on. He's like, that's what you do. Yeah. That's just what you did. It was just that simple. Like, there was no debating this and resisting this. Like, it was just the next step in the process. And so your dad had that, it sounds like.
Yeah,
also.
My dad, they talk about women in those days and, the whole The Feminine Mystique was written about that. But Barbara Ehrenreich, I think she wrote a book about the men. They were just as constrained as the women. I mean, women had it a little harder. I mean,
oh, indeed.
But
yes.
Yes, certain expectations. And so now,
look, if you wanted to have sex.
Exactly. Right? Yes.
Right? I mean, this very strong urge.
And especially if you're going off to war.
You're like, well.
Exactly. And so, now here we are in, 2020. You don't have to get married to have sex. You can have children without getting married. Women are financially independent. You can live together. I mean, you can create whatever kind of life you want. And there still is this thing about marriage.
Yes, and so I wanted to ask you about that. So before I ask you about that, so the other sort of theme is a podcast with Amy Guerin. I don't know if you know Amy. She's a journalist, and she wrote a book called "Stepping Off the Relationship Escalator." And it's a really fascinating book. And in it, she puts forth these sort of criteria for what she describes as this relationship escalator. And you referred to one of them, which is this idea of a successful relationship ends with someone dying.
Yes.
And so the criteria she puts forth is, sexual romantic exclusivity, so monogamy. Merging your identity or your infrastructure, your bank accounts, your living arrangements. Hierarchy, that is that this relationship has some special status, right? So you can do things with this relationship that you couldn't with other relationships, So the example she uses is, suppose you invited your best friend to join you at someone's wedding rather than your spouse, right? People are like, well, of course you should bring your spouse, but why are you bringing your friend? That's weird. So things, and then this idea of sexual connection that we were talking about, that there's some sexual intimacy there. And then the last one, which you've alluded to, is continuity and consistency. So it starts at some point and it remains until some end point.
The ideal end is death.
Is death. That's right. So I bring this up because in your book, you spend most of the book, you dedicate one chapter to each of several different types of marriage, like altered, revised, renewed, improved versions, so to speak.
So, yeah.
These are my words.
So right now, as we talked about, the only way to decide that a marriage is successful is if it lasts until death. But
that's a poor indicator.
Because you can have a loveless, full of contempt, angry, abusive, horrific marriage, and a lot of them are like that. And people will say that's a success. So, we were like, no, that's not a success. So we said, what if people just married according to their values and goals? Like, what do I want from this marriage? What am I looking for? And so, and then you actually can decide whether it's going to be a successful marriage or not. Because you're saying, this is what I want this, you want that too. Okay, so this is going to make our marriage successful. So let's say you just want to have children. So now, do you have to marry the love of your life as someone who's a great sexual partner, or do you want to marry someone who's going to be a really good dad or a really good mom? That should be really your priority. And then if you raise the kids to whatever age you decide is the age that good enough, usually 18 when they're off to college, then you can say, do we want to stay together? And if we do we want to switch it up? Maybe we want to have an open marriage at this point. So, so what we want to do is to help people individualize their marriage based on their values and goals and needs.
Okay, so we're going to go through each of those. So the one you just described is a parenting marriage, as I think that's right. So they have terms for them. So I hope to get them right. But so we'll revisit that one briefly. But I want to ask you why. So first of all, I commend the two of you for doing this. I think it's actually a very useful conversation in terms of just trying to get people to shift away from the one standard that this is what marriage should look like. And as we know, as you were saying, the divorce rates are high enough to put that standard into question. My analysis, I was glad to hear what your analysis was. My analysis was it's 35%. Like, what is the probability that you will get divorced? But that number goes up or down depending on a lot of things.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the people who, right. So, like, for example, low income people have a much higher probability. For example, so one of the sad things about marriage is it's actually stacked against the people who could probably, in many ways, need it the most. In terms of like resources and so on.
But you could have a roommate too.
That's true.
I do remind people that because if you're just getting married for the financial thing, and believe me, marriage is a financial arrangement, as you know. It is the number one financial arrangement. If that is why you're getting married, get creative and think of something. Get a roommate.
Yeah, I think you should exhaust more options before you should take some online courses and try to improve your career. So I want to press you on one thing. I promise this is the most mean I'm going to be, which is, why even stick with marriage, right? So why even continue to use that standard? So I feel like you have deviated, but you kind of done a little turn
It's a
there.
very valuable question, and I'm going to answer it. Because when you wed, in the United States anyway, you are privy to more than 1,100 federal perks and protections, and then there's some on the state level. So what we have done is we say, you two are making this commitment. Here, here's all these goodies. And then and then when Social Security was changed, in the 50s, I think, post-war, then it really kind of encouraged the breadwinner homemaker model. So
I see.
Yes. And so privileges. Now, in other parts of the world, you don't have to get married to get privileges. And I think it is ridiculous to privilege people based on their romantic and sexual life. It's ridiculous. However, that's what we got. And if that's what we got, then people should consider that. Now, I know a number of people who are long-time cohabiting couples. They've never gotten married. And they are, in some ways, they might be losing out on things, but that's a choice they made. And actually, two economists, one was in the Obama administration, Betsy Stevenson, and her partner, Justin Wolfers, they have children together, at least, or maybe one child, and they don't live together because they're not married. They live together because they did the economics on it, and they decided that it's better if we don't wed. So people should really think about that if they do want to get married and see, is marriage going to really help us, or is marriage going to hurt us? But it tends to help a bunch of people because of those perks and privileges. Yeah,
I see. Yeah, I know. A previous guest, she comes up all the time, but Bella DePaulo.
Bella,
so everybody knows Bella who's playing in this space. She's done, I think, some very good work on not only like where are the benefits, where are the perceived benefits, and then obviously also where are the costs, right? So when you, as we were talking about earlier, when you don't do this thing,
yes,
people, and obviously, again, I think it's harder. Society is harder on women who don't do it than men. There's a double
society is hard on women in a lot of ways, but that is a different conversation for another day.
Yes. Well, yeah, that's fair. I mean, of course, as a man, I also will say society is hard on men and women, but in different ways.
And I am the mother of two young men, and yes, and I know the messages they get too. Yes, I'm aware.
Yeah. I mean, it's just it's a gentle reminder that I say, like, as we're taping this during, the Black Lives Matters time, and one thing that is absent from this conversation is who gets killed by police. It's almost exclusively men. That is true. But when it comes to relational elements and caregiving and challenges in terms of balancing career and parenting, and I mean, one of the things that, like, one of the great funny sad statistics is the second shift has gotten worse during the pandemic in some ways.
Yeah, it has. I've been reading a lot of articles about that, and then there's been a lot of books about getting men to do their share and this and that. And I just want to scream because, one of the things in our book, and something that I'm a big believer in, is relationship or marital contracts, in which you come to agree. You have some hard discussions about things. You come to agreements. You hold each other accountable, and you talk it through maybe yearly and go, how's it working? It's not working.
Yes.
Rather than what most people do is build up the resentments and the this and the that. And, this is what breaks up a lot of marriages. I hate to say it. There is so much resentment. I remember a few years ago, there was an article in, I think it was Parents Magazine, and the headline was Mad at Dad. And like more than 1,000 women wrote in, and like 75% of them, like some huge amount, were just pissed off at their husbands all the time.
I see.
Because of all of the stuff that they were doing, and that the guys weren't doing, or weren't doing enough of, or whatever. So that's a problem.
That is indeed. That's a real problem, because those things are fixable.
Totally.
Right. It's not like these are major differences of opinion and lifestyle.
This totally is
about cooking meals and cleaning dishes and vacuuming and running errands.
And buying the birthday gifts and making the calls to the parents. I mean, it is totally fixable. It is. Yeah.
Yeah. This reminds me of a story of a colleague that had been married. This is not a close colleague. This is someone in my career world. Had been married, had kids, was divorced, and then met a woman who, and they started dating, had a good relationship. She said, "I want to have children. I want to get married and have children." And he's like, "I've had children. I'm not really that excited to do this, but I will marry you." And I will impregnate you. I mean, he didn't say it these are my words, not his. I will contribute financially, but I'm not going to change diapers. I'm not going to,
Sounds like Trump.
these are the things that I will not do. Right? I've done it. I don't want to do it again. I understand why you want to have kids. And she said yes to that. She was like, okay. That's our agreement. That's our arrangement.
Is it working out?
Well, as far as I know, but But
in a way, I can see that it would work, because it gives one person total control. Because if one person wants to raise the child a certain way and wants to, do this kind of education and this kind of religious training and this kind of disciplining, you don't have to argue with someone. And actually, a lot of single moms say it's so much easier in that respect. It's their control. They can do whatever they want, and they don't have to negotiate with someone.
Yes, and especially when there's no tiebreaker, and so when you have three people, you've got a tiebreaker. But when it's two, right, you've got at some point, and some of these things, there's no middle ground, right? You know what I mean? Like you have to choose one path or another. That's a very good point. But I think what that story is a nice segue into these different types of marriage that you and Susan put forth in The New I Do. So let's start with the starter marriage.
Well, I had one of those, and then really, but not intentionally. I just.
You didn't set out for it to be your starter marriage.
We were just poorly matched, and it was a few months before my 21st birthday, and he asked me, and we never discussed anything, and I said, okay, and then realized, this is not working. So How long did it take before you realized it wasn't working? A few years. We were married maybe for about 4 years, but we didn't divorce for a while. So we were probably together for about 3.5 years. So, so a starter marriage is a marriage of under 5 years. There should be really no children involved. And
is it with generally younger folks?
Generally, yes. Yeah. Okay. It doesn't have to be, but generally. And it's kind of like trying marriage on for size. And then people push back and they go, we'll just live together. That's marriage light, but it's not. Because everyone understands husband-wife. People don't understand always living together. Are you living together just because you're saving money? Are you in love with each other? What you love with each other? Is who does what? And it doesn't have the cachet, I suppose, of
the hierarchy. That's
So, but our idea of a starter marriage actually is not new. Throughout history, there have been starter marriages. It's part of what we think marriage should be, which should be a term-limited, renewable marriage, which, again, isn't even really new. I mean, Margaret Mead said, she was speaking for women, and this is back in the day, she said, women should have 3 husbands, one for youthful sex, back in the day when you couldn't have sex, one to raise children with, and one in old age to be your companion. And I'm like, yeah, Margaret, go. That's exactly what we need.
That's outstanding. I had not heard that story.
And so the way we present a starter marriage is that you do come up with this relationship contract of why are we doing this? And it's not that you are doing it because you think you're going to split. You're doing it because, well, we do care about each other and we do want to be together. And let's see if, we're on the same page about things. And so we have like a sample marital contract for a starter marriage, of like, what are our goals? What do we want to do? How are we going to handle things like in-laws and pets and friends visiting and who moves for whom's job, In other words, we really want people to have a lot of conversations before they go into a marriage. People spend so much time planning a wedding and they forget to plan a marriage.
I think it's striking the amount of time and resources that go into planning a 6-hour event.
It never used to be like that. Maybe I don't know. I got married, on a mountaintop in Colorado and then under a tree in Balboa Park. So I'm not that kind of wedding person. But everyone made fun of Gwyneth Paltrow when she consciously uncoupled. But yes, we want people to consciously couple. So really think about this thing that you're doing, have conversations, and then, I mean, ideally, at the end of the period that you decide, then you say, okay, that was great or that wasn't so great. And if we did have temporary time-limited marriage licenses, then you would be able to split without all of the drama of a divorce and the expense of a divorce, Mm-hmm. And there, as I say, there have been in history certain things like that, very similar to that. And I think we're ready for that again. We're really ready for temporary marriages and starter marriages where you just see if you're a good fit, see if your goals are aligned. And then, if it doesn't work, then you can split. And if it does work, then you can decide, well, where are we going now? Do we want to have children? Mm-hmm. And then you will transform your marriage into whatever you want it to be in the next phase. Because, there are phases to a marriage, right?
Well, as Margaret Mead points out.
Exactly. And also, if you look at some of the timings of divorces, the joke is the 7-year itch, but it is kind of 7, 14, 21. There is a little bit of a rhythm to when there is some divorce happening. Yeah.
I see. I had a divorce mediator on, and one of the things that she pointed out that I thought was very interesting was, there's all this resistance to people having a prenup. And so, in some ways what you're describing is a little bit of some of the kinds of conversations that you have with a prenup, which is, should we split? This is how it will go down.
Yeah, that's fine. Prenups generally are strictly financial stuff, but that's kind of changing. So yes, and a prenup scares people. It sounds so negative, like you're planning your divorce. Yes. But actually, it's smart because the state has a plan for you.
That's right. Yeah. That's what she said. Yeah, she said, look, you may resist a prenup, but just know you have a prenup. It's just not called that. Yes, that's right. And I thought that was a really insightful thing. I think it's actually a strong way to argue for a prenup, which is, would you be comfortable with this outcome? And if you're not comfortable with this outcome, then you should have a prenup.
Yes. And so in calling it a marital plan, although in the book we do call it a prenup, I just forget what we called it in the book.
I see.
It's a plan. What you are doing, it's much more, it sounds better. You're planning something. Mm-hmm. You're agreeing to things. And that sounds so much more positive, really, even though it basically is the same thing.
Yeah, I get it. I can see how it would be quite threatening for people to do that. But I also sense that if you and your partner want to do this, it's already a good sign that you will have some compatibility.
Yes. And
I think I can imagine the challenge is one person wants to do it. One person's very pragmatic, and the other one may subscribe to sort of a more kind of, traditional or at least contemporary view of love and marriage.
If that's happening, that would be like, let's not rush into marriage. Let's talk some more.
So you've already mentioned one of the other ones, which is this parenting marriage, the idea. And I think that that's a very, again, talking about dating, I noticed this with women in their sort of mid to late 30s, where there is some urgency to figure this all out because they want to have children. And the challenge of finding a partner who provides everything in that very short period of time, I think is a very real challenge.
And so you're seeing, more women who are freezing their eggs or whatever. But and you're also seeing the rise of these websites like Family by Design and co-parenting and Modamly, which is how.
What are the? I've not come across. Obviously, I'm not the target market for these things. So what is Family by Design and all these about?
Let's say you're a guy and you want to have a kid, and I'm a woman and I want to have a baby, but I don't want to be a single mom and you don't want to be a single dad.
Sure, that's hard.
That can be
by
very
the way.
hard.
That can be very difficult.
It's like a dating site in that you kind of find someone to have a baby with. And it can be that, you live close to each other or you live together or you don't. You can arrange it however you want. But there's like you fill out forms and there's background checks and there's this and that. And you have discussions about money and how is this happening and who's changing the diapers and everything. You're like really planning your parenthood. And that's what most people don't do. And, originally this was a way for, LGBT people to find a way to have children. Because if you're two guys, that's hard, or two women. But now more heterosexual people are looking into that. And so our parenting marriage is not quite like that, although it could be. You could just get together with someone to just have children with, and then, after age 18 or 20, whatever, say, okay, we did our job. Or it can be also that you have a contract of that time length, and then after that, you decide what you're going to do. And I actually met someone on an airplane once, and he had lived with his partner for 7 years, and he said they were getting married, and I said, why after 7 years? And he said exactly that. We want to have children. We're agreeing to 18 years together, and after that we'll see. And I thought, okay. So, and also in choosing a parenting marriage, maybe your focus is, like we talked about before, not like the guy who's going to give you great sex, but the person who's going to be an amazing dad. You're looking for these attributes, this kind of personality. And so the focus is more on children. And a lot of marriages now, what they call high investment marriages, are really focused around the children. So a parenting marriage makes sense.
I see. Okay. Now the flip side of that is a companion marriage.
So I struggled a little bit with a companionship marriage because I really couldn't quite put it is kind of like a spillover to me in that it could be a lot of things. So, my co-writer and her husband, they married older. They're not having children. So in a way, they have a companionship marriage. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's only for people who don't have children, because but it tends to be the kind of marriage that child-free people have.
Like they're like, this is so good. Let's not screw it up with a couple kids.
Exactly. And it also could be.
I have friends. They will not be named, but they have great kids. But they're like, I cannot wait for these kids to go to college so I can start spending more time with my wife. You know what I mean? Like that. It's really wonderful and refreshing to hear. Like, and because they've done a fantastic job being parents. Like the kids are amazing, but they have this connection, that really seems to be this way. Like they're sort of like, all right, kids. You know what I mean? No gap year for you.
Yeah,
you're going to college.
It's so funny because, I grew up where I was talking about this with friends the other day. Our mothers didn't even know where we were. Like, bye, Mom. Okay, be home for dinner.
It was easier back then.
My mom went about her life. She was in her sewing room doing her thing, and then she was making dinner. She didn't check on me. Where are you? She didn't fawn all over me. And because I'm kind of one of these strange people who doesn't really watch TV. I was watching Mad Men before it went away on Netflix, and I was just looking at them. You know, they didn't fawn over their children. As a matter of fact, they didn't really even pay attention to them. I don't even think they were very nice to them. And I mean, now parents are just so intense.
It's a heavy lift. It's very difficult.
To themselves, I think, because they're just so afraid that if they don't do all of this stuff, their kids will fail in the world. And I'm wondering if what we're going through now with the pandemic is a total reset for people.
It'll be interesting to see. Yeah, I think it's tough. I have sympathy, for these sort of modern day parents, because it comes from a place of love, and it comes from a place of wanting to see their kids to be successful and healthy and happy and so on. The tough thing is, it's very first of all, 40 to 50% of it is genetics. Right. So, you know what I mean? Let's say 40% of it's genetics, right? So, all right, well, those dice have been rolled already, so there's no unrolling them. And then, there's another 40%, which is like the stuff that give them access to, send them to the right schools and nutrition and all this stuff. And then there's like 20% of just randomness in the world, that you have very little control over. That is true, but parents can
really mess up kids, although I feel as a mother myself that I am responsible for keeping the next generation of shrinks in business. I've done my part.
Well, I think it's fair, right? Because what as a college professor, I teach the kids who had everything.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like not all of my students, but many of my students come from very privileged backgrounds, both parents, not divorced, upper middle class and beyond incomes, et cetera, right? All the things that are necessary to get you into a top school. And yet they struggle. You know what I mean? And so the idea is, of course, you give them everything that you can, because you don't know what matters and what doesn't matter. And even despite doing that, they all can't. It's not Lake Wobegon, right? Like, they're not all going to be, super successful, super tall, super happy, super beautiful, super healthy,
life is a crapshoot.
All those things. Yes, and then of course, as you know, adversity is good.
Yeah.
Right. That's how you build strong bones and you build muscle, is because you tax the body.
Yeah. Failure is really important. People are afraid to let their kids fail. And that is a really good thing for them to do. I mean, not in the way that they're going to, end up in jail or something.
No. They're small. These are small failures, not.
And also that you can reinvent yourself if you make a mistake. I mean, it took me 4 schools and 10 years to graduate college, because I did a lot of stupid things, like get married at age 20. but then you can find your way. And I think kids now are afraid to do that. People are afraid to let them do that. Yeah. But we digress.
We did digress. So the companion marriage folks don't have to worry about this.
And that's a marriage also for, I would say, like, people who are asexual, who are really not interested in that kind of romantic sexual thing. And I actually see it could be a marriage between friends who really just, yes, it's a spillover kind of marital model.
Got it. No, but again, so that's one. I completely understand. So that's one, for example, that in terms of Amy Guerin's relationship escalator may not have a sexual connection per se. You know what I mean? Or something like that. Yeah. It doesn't have to. And, it's really unfortunate when you think about it, right? So imagine you're married, you have kids, you are really quite fond of, you have affection for your partner, but the person doesn't turn you on. You don't like having sex with him or her. By today's standards, you either have to forego a healthy sex life, or cheat, or get divorced, or
Thank you,
open your
bingo.
marriage up. and the sad thing is, if you said to the world which of those is the best option, much of the world will say, well, you got to go out without the sex.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And so that's and so because if you get divorced, now you're being selfish, and what are you doing to the kids and all this stuff? If you're cheating, obviously we know the problems with that. And then enough people find having an open marriage distasteful.
Yeah.
And yet you present
open marriage. Yeah.
One of your marriages in the book is the open marriage.
Look, a lot of people don't really have honest discussions about monogamy. They don't really discuss if they're good at it. Are they choosing it? Do they like it? Have they ever not liked it? Have they ever not done it? And whenever we talk about monogamy, it's always like non-monogamy. It's always like, well, it's cheating, or it's there's something wrong with it. Instead of realizing that, why is monogamy the norm? Why do we choose that? And then people will say, well, it's so that it's evolutionary because women want to raise their children. And like, yeah, most of the evolutionary biologists are men. They're saying that. Wednesday Morton's book Untrue. Monogamy.
She's going to be a guest
I love
at some
her.
point.
You'll have fun with her. She, monogamy does not necessarily suit women any better than it does men. About 2 years is about when it starts to all. But also, people don't talk about it, and they don't talk about it even if, like, what if one of us becomes disabled or has an illness or whatever. One of the women we interviewed in our book, I think she was from Australia, her husband, whom she loves, became unable to have sex of any type, and he encouraged her to find someone for sex. And when she would be out with that person, it was so much shame and judgment, but they didn't really understand. And, we don't really have very many healthy models of consensual non-monogamy. And, generally people talk about Jada Pinkett Smith and Will Smith and like, oh, do they have an open marriage, whatever. And, and they're always like denying. And I'm like, what if they did? So what?
Yes. It would be useful.
It would be great if they did.
It would be good for the world to have successful couples.
I think so. And it's
I agree with that.
At least to think about the choices that you're making, and maybe you decide that, I really like monogamy, but at least you're making that decision. You're not just doing it blindly because you think that's the only way to be. And,
I think it's tough. Yeah, this is tough, right? Because so much of the undercurrent of the conversation that we're having is the tension between what these two people want and what's best for them. And then what does Aunt Sarah think about this? You know what I mean? And like, what is the, what's the, our kid's coach going to think about, like, the community, the family, there's a lot of social pressure.
Totally.
And then also, as you were saying, not only is like the benefits from the government, but there are sort of societal benefits, So for example, in the case of your friend, so she has a husband and then she has a lover. And so, well, what if the lover, is a foodie and she loves, what I mean? And he's like a great dinner companion.
Yeah.
And then she gets invited to, a couple's dinner, right? Like, well, she's got this one man that she could bring who he might do it because, he's obligated to do it. And then she has this other man that she could bring who would be appreciative. She would have a better time. the guest would have a better time because he would bring more to the dinner table,
right.
so to speak.
So to speak.
And so to speak. and then, but if she might get uninvited to future things because she brings her lover, and how awkward that is, and so on. Yeah, it's a tough, it can be a tough
and also,
world, I think.
Among people in polyamorous communities, they don't often talk about it because if someone is divorced, children can be taken away. So in those situations, I understand why you might want to keep things quiet, because there are real life consequences of that. But it isn't an option that a lot of people think of. And if you're in a quote unquote sexless marriage, you're not really going to find a counselor who's going to suggest it. They'll talk about, amp it up and date night.
They'll try to solve the sex problem.
And so there are a lot of people who are mismatched sexually with partners, and they're unhappy, and it makes them feel bad. And so we offer that as an option.
Okay, super. So we've alluded to one before, at least I think so, that you call a safety marriage.
So, some people would call that like a gold digger marriage or something. Like they'll look at Crystal Harris when she was married to Hugh Hefner and say, well, she's a 60-year difference. She can't possibly be loved. But honestly, if you are marrying for money or safety, however you want to call it,
okay,
and you are upfront about that, that is an arrangement, and it is probably much more transparent than someone who doesn't share that as soon as we get married, I'm going to quit my job and I just want to be full-time whatever. And
still have a housekeeper. I've seen that happen. I'm like, why does this homemaker have a housekeeper?
It's a big house. Big house. But so that might not be for everybody. However, because as we were saying, marriage is a financial arrangement. You can be transparent about it. And, some of the people we interviewed in the book after the recession were looking for someone who had health insurance. And I can see people needing that right now because the way that we get health insurance is through employment. So, or through marriage. And that's wrong. Everyone should be entitled to that. But so marriage is a financial arrangement. Maybe you want to have that kind of a marriage. And there's no judgment for me on that, as long as everyone's being transparent about it.
Yeah, that's right. There's consent. I think it's fascinating. Certainly with the rise of dating apps and the internet, you've seen more transparency. This is always like some exchange.
It is always an exchange.
So my friend Kathleen Voss and her co-author Roy Baumeister have written about what they call sexual economics. And it's funny because they try to publish these papers in these peer-reviewed journals that are, edited and reviewed by fairly liberal people, very progressive people, and folks who rightfully are champions of equality and egalitarianism and so on. And they get a lot of pushback from this. And they're always surprised because there's so much evidence for sexual economics, for an exchange, obviously prostitution being the most, common and arguably, they always say the oldest profession, so to speak. But, these arrangements, there's a website, I think it's called Seeking Arrangements or something like that.
there's one.
Oh, is that, well, it's even more so. Okay. Right. I mean, as well as like on the apps, where people are sort of either very blatant or very coded in their language, around this topic, which, about lifestyle and generosity and, and so on. And I share the same belief that you do, which is as long as there's consent, as long as these are adults and there's consent, I'm not sure that there's much to art. I mean, people may find it distasteful, but you just say it's not right for you, but it seems to be working for Hef,
before he died. So successful marriage
before he passed. Yes. Touche. So I think your book, I wrote this down, and actually I went down the rabbit hole and looked at this. I think your book brought this to I didn't know this, but if you're in the U.S. military and you get married, you get a pay increase. And as a result of that, some military personnel seek out an arrangement, like putting ads on Craigslist where they are looking for someone to marry, and then they basically, I assume they split the added benefit. There's that's an arrangement, right? They get to negotiate that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So like I said, marriage and the perks and the privileges, it's financial, and people should be much more transparent about that. We don't like to say we're marrying for money, but when people give the top 5 reasons to marry, financial's in there. What if it was number 1 instead of love?
And it has to be for some people, you would have to assume. Yeah. And this is that sort of merging criteria that Amy talks about. We have 2 more. Okay. So this one I found really fascinating is the covenant marriage, because I have never heard of this before. People have not heard of it. But I'm not surprised.
So we struggle to put that in there, because why would you want to put a more restrictive marriage in there? So to kind of explain what it is, in certain states, I think is 4, there is actually a separate marriage license. There are 2 marriage licenses in the United States, in those 4 states in the South. And
of course.
So you have to do much more before you can get married. You have to take classes and this and that. And you have to do a lot more if you want to split. You can't just divorce.
Okay. Yeah, I wrote harder to get in and harder to get out.
Well, who the heck in their right mind wants that? However, for the people who have entered into it, and it's not real. It's a very small percentage of people, because it wasn't really very publicized. So people really didn't know very much about it. It was, I think, the fundamental Christians, I believe, started this. It was, it tied into religious stuff. But the people who choose it, because they're doing the premarital counseling together, they're having the conversations, they're going into it with eyes wide open, they have satisfying marriages. Because what we discovered, whatever the model is, if you are on the same page about stuff, you have a more satisfying marriage.
I also have to, as a scientist who questions a bunch of things, is I have to wonder, are the people who opt into this also just the types who would have been just fine under a regular marriage anyways, because they're already so committed?
And yes, probably. And, community is a big part of that. And so with, in this case, a religious community, and that helps keep people accountable. It also can really prevent people from leaving abusive things too. So it's both sides of the coin there. Right. But yes, probably. Maybe. We don't know.
Well, we don't know. We can't run the experiment, but yes. So the last one, and I kept it for last for obvious reasons, is
live apart together marriage. Yeah.
Yes.
So I happen to really like that one the best.
And LAT, live apart together, a sort of solo solo focused marriage.
Yeah. Yes, because and people have a hard time like, well, why even get married if you're not going to live together? Well, because you value your space, or your jobs are in different places, or you're just an independent person, or you just can't put up with his crappy decor, or whatever. I mean,
well, yeah, I like to sleep with it being super cold, and you like to sleep with it being super warm.
And so, like, in the last year or two, people have been talking about sleep divorce, which is not really quite the same. It's like light in that you're not sleeping in the same room, but you're giving each other freedom, and that really works for some people. Like, I think, like, for single people, if you could find the best of single living and keep that into a relationship, what would you want? And a lot of people really do like their freedom, and they really want to have a partner too, but they kind of like their freedom.
They like their space to be their space.
To be their space, yeah. And it is a growing phenomenon, especially in Europe. It's growing among older people. I wrote an article on Medium, like, older women don't want to live with their romantic partners. Here's why. And it went freaking viral. And all the women are writing in going, oh my God, I'll never live with anyone again. I'll never live with anyone again. And I won't either. I don't want to. I want us to hang together.
What were some of the reasons?
If you have been, let's say, married before, as a lot of the women were, they've been there, done that. They've cared. They've been the main caregivers.
Yeah, they pick up the
and they're
slack.
Like, I'm done. Yes. I'm done with that.
I get it. Do not blame them.
That is a big one for women. But there were men who were feeling that way too. So,
I always like to say is, like, you don't want to sleep with, like, if you have to parent your partner, there goes your sex life.
Exactly. Right? And all the research shows that people who live apart are just as committed, and they're happy because they do have their autonomy. They actually have to work a little bit harder on their relationship, so they can't take their partner for granted, which is what a lot of people do. You're living together. You're not even really spending quality time. You're just kind of occupying the same space. Whereas the people who don't live together and then make the conscious effort to, get on the plane or drive or walk or whatever to be together, then they're more present, and they appreciate that person in that moment, in that time. And it really works for a lot of people. It really does. Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. I actually really like, so again, as you look, if you look through these marriages in the book, and you compare them to these kind of standards for the gold standard of a quote unquote good relationship, this idea that you might not merge your infrastructure and your identity as much in this living apart together style marriage.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I like that idea. I like this idea that, for example, non-monogamous relationships are often more honest than monogamous relationships because they force a variety of conversations.
So much talking that I really don't know if I could do it.
But the living apart together also has a little bit of that element. Like you plan to see each other. You plan what you're going to do. Like date nights are a real thing. Not a we should force ourselves to go out one night this week.
You have to be much more present and conscious about what you're doing as a couple when you don't live together 24/7. And I don't see that as a bad thing. I see that as a good thing. It's very easy to become complacent in a relationship where that person's around all the time, and you can take them for granted, and you can just forget to appreciate them. And but you really can't do that easily. And also, may I say, if you can't have sex all the time when you get together, need I say more?
You want to.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. The other benefit is it also reduces how annoying that person can
Oh
be.
my God. And so many
Right?
people now, because of the quarantine, their lockdown. And I was just reading these articles, and the woman is like going, I didn't realize my husband was a circle back guy. I can't listen to him when he's on the phone conversations. You're finding out so much more about your spouse now. And
That's funny.
Look, people can be annoying. Not you and me, Peter. We were not annoying at all. But some people can, and they have bad habits, and maybe they snore really loudly at night, or they need, whatever.
Yeah, or they're too messy, or they're too clean, or whatever. They keep. Here's the other one I see. They keep weird hours.
Okay. Yes.
Right. So you have a night owl and a lark living together, and that's tough. But a night owl and a lark living apart.
Exactly.
You just meet at 3:00. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
it
that
removes
kind
a lot
of
of the
thing.
little niggling things that people fight about throughout the day, but you don't have to really deal with that, quite honestly.
Yeah. I'm not that interested in marriage, obviously, but this would be the one I would choose. If I had to choose from your list.
Yeah,
this is the one I'm going
with
for.
you.
This actually reminds me, so I've had a couple breakups, and it was interesting because the thing that broke us up was not some fundamental incompatibility, but it was my partner saying, I want to move in. I want us to move in. And I did not want the relationship to end, but I wasn't willing to move in. And so, that's sort of an unfortunate kind of mismatch.
That is, and a number of older women are finding that that's what the men want. Yeah, because they want someone to, not to be cliche, but they want someone to cook and clean and take care of them. I'm not saying
that's right.
I'm not saying all people are like that, but if you're an older man and you're used to that, and the women are like, no, not happening.
Yeah. And I don't need someone to cook and clean because I just outsource much of my cooking and cleaning. And I can cook and clean when I need to, as demonstrated by the quarantine. But the last thing I'll put it in the exhibits, but this reminds me of a joke that Chris Rock has in one of his recent Netflix special called Tambourine. So he talks about his divorce, and his challenges with marriage and so on. But he has this joke, which I think is it's just the kind of thing that a comic would come up with. He's like, my parents were married. I'm going to butcher this, but my parents were married for 40 years. He goes, but they didn't spend 40 years with each other. He's like, a third of the time they were sleeping, and a third of the time dad was at work and mom was at home. And then, so he's like, they were together for about 16 years, like that kind of thing. He goes, but in my marriage, he's like, my wife and I were communicating all the time. Like, I leave the house, and by the time I'm at the end of the driveway, there's a text message from her. Like this idea, like there is something to this idea that we are much, much more connected than we ever were before. There's actually even less distance and less of a break, so to speak. True.
Now, if you live apart, the technology works. Totally.
It does work for you. It has that flip. That's a good point.
24/7 and you're getting texts. Don't forget to pick up the this and the that. It's like, all right, it's the same with poor kids nowadays. Like, parents are like, where are you? What are you doing?
Yes.
All the time.
Yeah. Like parents are tracking their kids on their phone. They know exactly where they are.
It's too much.
Yes, that's right. Well, Vicki, this was a lot of fun. You're a delight, and you. I have to admit, I was like a little bit like, I wonder how this is going to go. I'm talking to someone who's putting forth more ways to get married, and I'm talking about fewer ways to get married. But I think I think what you're doing is noble work.
One of the things that we do have in the book is, why do you want to get married? And we really challenge people to ask themselves, why? Is it because all of your friends are getting married, or your parents expect it, or you think it's what you should do? Because, like I say, we want people to do conscious coupling, however that's going to look like. And maybe they will decide that marriage isn't the thing. But if they do decide marriage is the thing, then, they have options. We want them to know they have options.
Well, that's great. So I really appreciate you writing the book, and I appreciate your time today.
Peter,
This was
a
lot of fun.
Thank you so much for having me on. Cheers.
My pleasure. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. For more about our guests and show notes, go to petermcgraw.com. Please subscribe and share with your single friends.